everyone, Tina here. So after teaching yoga all these years, I have noticed very common poses that students continually do incorrectly. So I've got the top 6 poses that I'm going to show you today where people often are out of alignment, and if you continue to do it that way, you can actually harm your body. So many of these poses are taught in most yoga classes that you either take in a studio or online. And even though I verbally cue the alignment in these poses, sometimes it's just hard to maybe understand my exact cueing, what your teacher is saying, and to physically see your body in the pose while you're trying to take the yoga class. So these next 6 poses are hopefully going to be corrected based on these tips I'm going to give you. So especially if you take vinyasa or flow style classes, you likely do the low plank, up dog, down dog, the vinyasa. So the thing that I see most students kind of mess up on, or they don't have the strength enough for, is the Chaturanga, the low plank. So I'm going to demonstrate options for your low plank and what can happen in your body if you continually do it incorrectly. All right, the Chaturanga. So we start here in high plank, and what it is you go to your low plank. This right here is your Chaturanga. Now, what I often see people do is they set up their high plank and their belly button and hips are just drooping down towards the mat. You have 0 core engagement when you do this, and you can really stuff up your back if you continue to do this way. So step 1 is to hug that navel in and press the back towards the ceiling. Step 2, to keep your shoulders safe, you glide out. So your shoulders are now beyond the fingertips. That keeps shoulders nice and safe so that when you bend the elbows, you've got that nice 90-degree bend. The next thing is you don't want to do your planks and low planks like you would push-ups with your elbows going out towards the side. So you want to scoop those elbows in towards your rib cage and then take your low plank. Now, that can be a ton of strength needed for that pose. So drop your knees down to the mat and it would look a little something like this. Navel hugged in, glide forward, bend elbows in towards the ribs. Chaturanga, low plank. So you should not see any of the belly dropping down. Your belly should not come down towards the mat. Elbows should not be splaying out. So Chaturanga, glide out, belly up, elbows in, and only bend halfway down. So the next pose after your Chaturanga or low plank, you flow into your upward facing dog. This is another one where I feel you can easily crank your back up if you continue to do it incorrectly. So the way that I teach this athletic style of vinyasa flow is thighs do not touch the ground for your upward facing dog. This over time just builds a lot of strength. So you would go from traditionally your low plank, thighs, belly, nothing touches down, untuck the toes, and then press to straight arms. Heart is pressing forward, head is not flung back. You do not want to scrunch that cervical spine. Head straight up towards the ceiling, heart forward, legs are working and lifted. So one thing you're not doing as well is you're not dropping all the way down to your belly and then throwing yourself all the way up and keeping your thighs on the mat. This alone right here is really scrunching my low back. So you want to activate the tops of the feet and really press yourself up. Thighs are engaged and the front of the thighs are getting a nice stretch. Upward dog. So the final shape of that vinyasa and the next pose, downward facing dog. Now you'll probably do this multiple times in a class, so you might as well get it done correctly so that A, you don't feel awful and stuck and it feels like a hard pose, and B, so that you've got that nice releasing upside down V shape. So let's get into downward facing dog. Down dog is a gentle inversion, so the hips are higher than the head and higher than the heart. Now, this should be over time a fairly restorative pose, but again, if you're brand new to yoga, it can feel really, really hard. A lot of times it feels really hard because you actually have the weight forward. So notice how this is almost going towards a high plank pose as opposed to really pressing my hips high and back. Now, down dog seems like a simple pose, but there's a lot going on. First thing, you might have your heels lifted off of the mat. Totally fine. What I want you to notice is, are your shoulders kind of creeping forward towards the wrists? One way to come out of this is to press those arms as straight as you can get them. Have a little bend into the knees, and then see how I get that upside down V shape. So you don't want to have any kind of rounding here. You want to press a nice straight back, tailbone lifted, and over time, those heels might settle closer to the mat. Another thing, if you can see your heels behind you, your toes are facing out and you've got external rotation of the hip. See if you can have the toes spin in a little bit and the heels out of your line of vision. That brings the hips to a more neutral position. Let the head release, soften the shoulders, and gaze behind you. So coming out of those 3 vinyasa poses and into a standing pose, warrior 1. Now, I don't teach warrior 1 very often, and I think it's because there's way more going on in the pose than people really realize. I tend to do high lunges to get that strength in the front of the leg. But when I do cue warrior 1, 9 times out of 10, most people are not doing the pose correctly, no matter how often and how much I cue it. So I'll show you the proper foot alignment and what your hips should be doing in warrior 1. All right, so warrior 1 is a lunge. You'll likely step back to come into it or sweep a leg forward to come into it. So you have one leg out in front and you've got a bend in that knee. That is usually not the issue. It's this back foot that's the issue. So just a quick little peek, warrior 2, the hips are open towards the side of the mat and I've got a very wide angle of that back foot and ankle. Warrior 1 is not just taking that and looking forward. Warrior 1 is a completely different foot shape. It's usually a shorter distance between the feet and your toes as far forward as you can get them. Warrior 1 is squared hips to the top of the mat, not an opening up. This is easier. This is harder. Now, if you have a really tight calf or Achilles heel, your foot may not be able to get the angle that my foot is in. That's fine. Over time, with more practice, that will happen. You should really not have those toes facing off the side of the mat. So as much as you can get those toes forward, do that. That's going to allow that left hip to face forward. Also, heel toeing this right foot wider helps accommodate some space for that left hip. The last thing is sometimes in order to face forward, we tend to back bend and really throw the belly and the chest forward. Really hug that navel in, tailbone presses down, left hip forward, arms up overhead. Here's your Virabhadrasana B, warrior 1. Not an open hip and twisting forward. There's no twist in warrior 1. Triangle pose is next, a pose that you will often see in class. Now, triangle pose is a side body opener, but you'll likely see a lot of triangle pose trying to get a hand all the way down to the floor. Oftentimes, you don't have enough length on the side of the body for the opposite hand to drop down towards the mat, which means the hips overcompensate, come out of alignment so that you think you're getting deeper in the pose, but you're missing a whole side body stretch. So let's get into triangle pose. So triangle pose, 2 straight legs. Now you will have those left toes facing directly off the side of the mat and the opposite toes are facing forward. Hips open towards the long end of your mat. And here's where some of the issues start to come in with your triangle. So the arms go wide. You should be gliding straight out. And sometimes when people glide out, that hip likes to turn down and stack, which really turns into more of a forward fold and less of a side body opener. So I want you to think about more length here. Lift that top hand up towards the ceiling and then just try and glide that bottom hand down without finding any kind of rotation at the hips. So if you can imagine yourself being squeezed between two panes of glass, two boards of any kind, you are completely flush. A good way to do this is actually to stand all the way up against the wall, and I'll show you that right now. Now this is one of the most honest ways to see if you're doing triangle pose correctly. Press the whole body against the back of the wall and the arms go wide. So you do not want any hip coming off of the wall. Glide yourself out and then let those arms go up and down. So if you've kicked away from the wall, that's where you are overcompensating to get deeper as opposed to opening up this side body. Last thing is forward folds. I can't say enough about forward folds and how they are often done incorrectly. So if you can just imagine yourself kind of sitting casually on the couch or in a chair, you'll kind of notice the shoulders tend to round in because your core maybe isn't super engaged. So when you keep this position and forward fold, you're keeping that position. You're not trying to roll the shoulders down and sit up nice and tall and get space in other parts of the body. I teach forward folds where you get, yes, flexible, but also stronger in the core. So we can stay on the ground here and work into some forward folds, and then I'll show you them in the standing variations as well. So a traditional Paschimottanasana, a seated forward fold. The first thing you want to start with is actually your feet. Now, oftentimes feet when you forward fold are just completely lax and not doing anything. When I teach it, I want you to press those heels forward. You'll feel the tops of the thighs engage, which means the bottoms of the legs are getting the stretch. Now you might be able to see that my pinky toes are kind of pointing out and my big toes pointing in. Try to get those feet even. So you're really pressing out through the big toe mound of that foot. So my legs super engaged right now, even though I'm not doing any part of the forward fold. Next piece, if you kind of are sitting here rolling and you really round and come forward, it might feel good, but it's not giving you a ton of benefit because your shoulders are crowding your ears. The back is completely rounded, and that's honestly a shape that we are in all day long, especially if you computer work and are on your phone a lot. You've got that rounding. So once the feet are active, the legs are nice and straight, I want you to focus on sitting up tall and imagine your chest can go beyond the top of your mat as opposed to the chest falling straight down. So I'm not warmed up. I didn't do a yoga class before this, so my hamstrings are on the tighter side. I'm not going to be able to go super deep. So I'll sit up tall, hug my navel to my spine, knowing that my whole core is engaged. Shoulders are out of the ears, and then I'm just going to reach out, imagining my chest could go as far as it can. Right now, my hamstrings are telling me that's as far as I can go. Keep my shoulders down, and then I can walk my hands out, and today, they're just on my lower legs, not, well, maybe at my toes, but down by the ankles. And then I would just drop my chin towards the chest. This is a much more active and what I think more flexibility building pose than this. Okay, there's still some length happening down there, but everything on the top of the body has just been lost. So focus on pulling your heart forward, keeping that back, that core engaged, and then you might lose some distance, but over time, building more flexibility and more strength. This one tends to be one of my pet peeves. All right, standing version of your forward fold. Again, another pose that is often practiced in a typical yoga class. So toes are slightly together, heels are a little bit apart, and that's going to bring those thighs and hips towards a more neutral position. So standing forward folds, oftentimes the weight is pressed back into the heels as you come down. And now just take a peek. My hips are really far pressed back beyond my heels, which means a lot of tension is coming to the hamstring attachment, which is right at your butt, basically. Now, I have that injury, I have had that injury, and it's not fun to work with. So I want you to focus on when you're coming down into your forward fold, keeping the feet evenly grounded. So it would look a little more like this. Hips stay over the heels, and you're down. Now, I can touch the mat with straight legs. Most of you out there will probably have a bend into the knees. That can be your forward fold. You might not have the hamstring length to drop the hands down. This is one of the best ways to lengthen your hamstrings. Allow a bend into the knee enough to get the hands down, and notice my back. My back is nice and flat. It's not rounded, and my shoulders are not crowding around the ears, just so I can get deeper in the pose. So even if I've got really tight hamstrings, I'm going to lean out so that I'm not pressing my hips far back, bend my knees enough so that my hands come down, and then heart forward, release your head and fold. Now, this could be your forward fold here, and you'll likely feel that nice stretch along the hamstrings. Over time, you'll notice that the arms stay straight, the hands down, but then your legs can start to straighten. Now watch what happens. This right now feels like a pretty comfortable forward fold for me, given that I'm not super stretched out. Now I'm going to round my spine and lose all of the strength in my back so that I can get what I think is closer by bringing my nose towards my knees. Now again, I'm still feeling some stretch at the backs of the legs, but my torso and shoulders and core are doing nothing. So the difference is rounding the spine like we do all day long, or losing some of my depth, but activating the legs a bit more. My shoulders are working, my core is working, and it's better alignment and spine health over time. So those are just 6 of the most common poses that I see often done incorrectly, or that I'm constantly cueing proper alignment during a regular class. If you're pretty new to yoga, a lot of this might come as, I have no idea what I'm doing. So just take it with a grain of salt. Try to work on just one of the pieces of the pose that I have given you today. And if you've been practicing yoga for a little while, try to put a couple of these pieces to test and just see how you're able to incorporate them in your regular practice. So, thanks for coming to Tina's Yoga Room. Let me know how you liked this video by either giving me a thumbs up or a comment in the comments. If there's other stretches you're interested in and you're not quite sure if you're doing them correctly, jot them down in the comments and I'll record another video about it. Follow me on Instagram, where I'm always posting about yoga and probably a little bit too much about my dogs. And don't forget to subscribe right down there, a little red button. Thanks for watching. Namaste.